Welcome to the Coastside Land Trust webinar series, and in particular, the fog belt birding that we're going to see today. I'm Jo Chamberlain, the Executive Director of the Coastside Land Trust, and we're just delighted to have you with us today. And of course, the famous Alvaro Jaramillo is always an incredible presenter, and even those of us who have listened to him over the years, we always learn something new every time we talk with him, and he shares his experiences and his knowledge with us. Before I get started, a few little logistics. This webinar and all of our webinars are on our website and can be viewed at any time. Those of you who are registered will receive an email in the next day or two that has a link to this webinar so that you can share it with others. It's important that we keep funding our organization and these educational activities. So if it's within your means, if you could please donate to us to help the organization thrive, we would be very grateful. And the last thing is, at the very end of Alvaro's presentation, Kate will come on and she'll lead you with Alvaro through the questions and answers that hopefully you'll post your questions at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon that says Q&A. And if you would click on that and write your questions in there, then Kate and Alvaro will go over all of those with you and make sure that, that you get every bit of information you need from this webinar. So moving on, and I know you're here to see Alvaro and hear him, not me. Alvaro is a famous international ornithologist, biologist, and ecologist. And we are so fortunate living here in Half Moon Bay to have him in our community. And he knows everything about birds, I think. That's my experience anyway. But there was another thing that happened yesterday. He was out on one of his pelagic trips out to the Farallon Islands, and they saw a pod of orcas. And this is a fairly famous pod of orcas that has an individual named Frosty in it. And I hope Alvaro will just take a minute to share that experience that he had. Alvaro, please take it away.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about Frosty in a bit here, and I will start sharing my screen. Also, I want to apologize. I was out on that ocean trip having a great time yesterday, and we were screaming out birds and whales and things, and my voice is a little rough. So, but it's kind of that happy feeling of sort of knowing you had a great day yesterday that you know, why I have that rough voice. But here we are, fog belt birding from the ocean to the redwoods is what we're going to call this talk, and it's a little different in some respects. We've in the past we've done talks about different parts of the coastside, and this one kind of ties in the entire situation of from the beach to the hills to the mountain, how things change and why they change, and why all this creates the diversity we see of birds and also other creatures. You know, could be butterflies, could be anything else too, but we're sort of focusing on the birds today. And as Joe mentioned, you know, the Q&A is the way to sort of put in your questions as things come up, and then we're going to try to get to some of those or all of those if we can at the end, and then we can, if we don't have time, we can move on and do it through email, and we'll get you some answers. But we hope to answer every question that you have. I've been starting some of my talks recently with this image and this concept, which is that when you're out at nature, you can enjoy things, you can see interesting stuff, but it also, there's this actually much deeper level of health benefit that you gain from being outside. And it's been studied now. This professor, Dr. Bratman at Stanford University, has been looking into how people react to the natural environment and how they react to non-natural environments, like, going and walking down the street in a busy intersection and so forth. And they've been studying students that are tested for all of, the sort of body chemistry, and they go and take them out, walk around the city versus walking around a natural place like Santa Cruz Mountains. And then they retest afterwards, and they find that all of the signals of sort of broodiness and depression and rumination and sort of overthinking are less as if you've been in nature versus the city. In a sense, you're getting therapeutic beneficial effects from being outside, that nature acts like a positive drug, in a sense, to your brain. And this is really important. So you're not just going out there to have fun, you're getting health benefits from being outside. And part of what's happening is that our brains look at fractals, and fractals are those, like this fractal tree, where each branch becomes another branch, and you kind of go and look deeper and deeper and deeper into it. There are lots of fractal patterns in nature, and those things seem to sort of calm and center us, but they cannot be these computer generated fractals. They have to be the real thing, that somehow we relate to these patterns and get this beneficial effect of being outside. So I always say that birds are sort of the gateway drug to nature, because they help you have a reason to sort of go outside. It's so easy to say, oh, I'm going to go have a walk somewhere, but you can sort of put it off and put it off. But if you have something that you're kind of also interested in that gets you out there, like, a Townsend's warbler, you'd be like, oh, I want to see one of those. And you go outside and you try to find them in the winter. Or peregrine falcon, which can, this is taken right here in the harbor a few months ago, flying by, and you're interested in seeing these things and learning about them, and you suddenly have a goal. It's so much easier to get out there in nature and start looking for these birds and getting all of these beneficial effects of being outside. Now, it doesn't have to be birds. It could be, hiking of any kind, fishing, being outside. All of it helps your brain become feeling a little more calm, healthier, and less stressed out. This is an American goldfinch that's they're out in my backyard right now. And with birding, though, the one of the things that's really cool about it is that it might be one of the most diverse, portable, interesting things you can do with your spare time. I mean, I've been to some of the most isolated places on Earth, like, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, to Antarctica. And everywhere you go, there's a bird to look at. And sometimes it's a rather unique one when you go to these other places. So you can do this everywhere. You can be in the middle of Paris and watching birds, as well as, catching, a show or eating some great food. And in that respect, I say that birding is like a good hot sauce. It goes well with everything. So you can be a golfer and also be paying attention to the birds, and it might enrich your entire experience of being outside with your friends playing golf. You can have great meals after you go birding. You can, in this case, here's my family some years ago walking our dog, and we walk the dog every day. And I always take my binoculars with me to walk the dog and see all sorts of interesting things. And it just adds another element of interest to any other outdoor activities. And even sometimes I'm like feeling lazy about walking the dog, I really don't want to walk the dog. But then I go out there and I see something cool, and I realize, oh, this was all so much fun. It was not at all something I should have been sort of thinking, oh yeah, I don't want to walk the dog today, the weather's bad. The birds bring me out there, and before you know it, I'm enjoying myself with the dog outside, and it's like a good hot sauce. It also has led me to amazing experiences that I didn't expect, from seeing a great white shark, at the Farallon Islands, lava flows in Hawaii, volcanoes exploding in Montserrat, this little bird over here to the lower right is called the Pincoya storm petrel. And through just general birding and touring with people, we were involved in actually describing this as a brand new species to science when we first sort of saw it and realized there's something different going on. And this brings us to yesterday. Yesterday, we were out at the Farallon Islands, and it started off like a really foggy day, and I could see the faces were sort of like, maybe we're not going to see anything because it's so foggy. Well, if we did get out there, we encountered an amazing pod of killer whales, orcas, including now this is one of the individuals. There were probably a dozen, including some big males, and then there was this gray one, sort of not an adult whale that we think is a famous one called Frosty, that's been seen all the way down in San Diego, and I think as far north as British Columbia, and they travel north and south looking to eat marine mammals. This is a group of whales that eats marine mammals. You've probably heard of the resident killer whales that are up in Puget Sound and Vancouver Island. They eat salmon, and these eat whales and sea lions, and maybe the reason they were at the Farallons. And there's even another group that's much rarer that eats offshore sharks. So these different kinds of whales, but it's really unusual to see killer whales. They're not easy to find. It's kind of a hit and miss. And yesterday we had one of the best experiences with them ever, which was great. And we saw all sorts of birds, puffins, hundreds of thousands of common murres, albatrosses, and coming right back into town. You can actually see town back here. There were humpback whales just breaching right there off the buoys, kind of entering the harbor. So things are really happening right now, and birds took us out there. And I joke that sort of the highlight bird of the day was the whales. And you're out there in nature, and anything can happen. Just an amazing sighting of a marine mammal, bobcat, or what have you. So how do you begin with all this birding? Well, you can just go in the backyard and watch. That's the simplest way to do it. You don't need a binocular, you don't need anything. But before you know it, you're going to say, well, I want to know what that yellow one is and the brown one, and you want to know what the red one with the cap is or whatever. And then you might want to have then a book or an app, or Merlin, which is a free app, that you can download on your phone, and then start tracking things through eBird and other things. And a lot of these things are free that you can download to help you out, or you can get our book, Birds of California, if you're interested in this sort of a book that simplifies the birds locally. So it tries to make it not so difficult, and the common birds that are in there. So that's how you sort of start. And you probably want to start also, in the backyard, sort of looking at what is coming and going and differentiating the different species from, chestnut-back chickadee to the bush tits, how they differ in shape, the colors, even little things like that. The eye on this is actually a female bush tit, has these bright yellow eyes. And if you want to see things that well, then you need binoculars. You need to have binoculars, or, you can have binoculars, eventually a camera and so forth, because you want to start recording these things for to look at later. And this is how it goes. You sort of can start from just watching in the backyard to getting more and more into it. But I always joke, I remember this has happened multiple times where people say, oh, you're a bird guy. What's that black bird? It's got red on the wings. And I say it's a red-winged blackbird, and they think I'm joking. That's actually what it's called. And if it only was this easy, right? That you had a bird that its name told you exactly what it looks like, and it looks like what its name, and then boom, easy. It doesn't usually work out that way. And even within the red-winged blackbird, sure, the male, can be a show off and showing you its name, but the female is stripy and brown and a little bit more like a sparrow. And that's where you start sort of learning, right? and you associate, okay, this brown thing's always with the male, so that's probably the female. You look at the book, look at the app, you look at what sparrows look like, you learn what they sound like, you learn about habitats, you learn about behavior, who flicks their tail, who does this, who raises their crest, and you observe all of these details that become ever more interesting as you have more context. And that's one of the things where I was saying, birding is so cool as an activity, in that the more you know, actually, the more it expands. And the more it expands, the more you want to know. And the more you know, the more it expands. It's a never ending puzzle that connects you to the birds, to the activities, to nature, to being outside. So I think it's just wonderful if you're new at this. And if you are even relatively new and want more resources, apart from those apps that I was telling you about, eBird, Merlin, and books, you can go and look at Sequoia Audubon Society, Google San Mateo County Birding Guide, and you can have this map where each one of these points is a clickable point that opens up a screen with what that spot is like, where you can park, what birds are there, when to visit, and what trails are good. So we have an amazing resource in this county for watching birds through the San Mateo County Birding Guide. And well, to get into some of the places and the birds themselves, and I want to center it on this idea of fog, because, well, if some of you have lived on the coast side a long time, you know that the coast side, Half Moon Bay and Pacifica, have always been known as places where foggy, cold, dreary, and today it's kind of cloudy, but we're actually changing, right? If you've been here a while, it's not nearly as foggy as it used to be. And in fact, what we call fog is a low stratus cloud, a marine layer. It's not really ground fog most of the time, but it still was summer here. You never saw the sun, and then suddenly September, October rolled in, and boom, there was our summer. It's changing, but our entire ecosystem is based somewhat on this effect of fog coming off the cold ocean. And I wanted to focus here on this bird called the white-crowned sparrow. And the ones that breed here are a specific type called Nuttall's white-crowned sparrow. It's not a species. The Nuttall's part is a group, a subspecies of the sparrow. But if we map this out, each one of these points is an eBird point where somebody has seen a white-crowned sparrow. And the white crowns, actually the colors, the red ones are recent ones within the last month, and then the blue ones are more historical. But what I did is I mapped white-crowned sparrow for the San Francisco Peninsula. Half Moon Bay is a little further down, and for June, July, breeding time. So the breeding times when this Nuttall's would be around here breeding. And what is really cool, if you can imagine, so here's the Farallon Islands, here's the Golden Gate. We kind of know, if you've lived here, that the fog rolls through the Golden Gate past the bridge, and it kind of hits this other side of the bay in El Cerrito and Berkeley and so forth. And if you look, the sparrow breeds where the fog is. San Francisco is really foggy, cloudy, and then they go right to the coast. They're not breeding in the warm interior parts. They're not in Danville. And even on the bay side, on the East Bay, they're really where that fog hits. This bird is actually associating, its habitat is specifically tied to the fog effect, and that fog effect is changing. But on the other hand, there are entire ecosystems when you go up to the mountains, including the Douglas fir, redwood forests, that are maintained by having the drip of fog or low cloud during the summer. And that area, those old growth trees up in the hills, actually are the breeding site for a seabird called the marble murrelet, this bird over here that you can see sometimes right along the coast in Half Moon Bay. And they're breeding in trees. It's very interesting that a seabird breeds in trees. This is the last species in North America that's a regular breeder that had its nest discovered. And this was, I want to say it was in the early 80s. So it was really quite recent. And they discovered it because it was in the trees and nobody was looking for them in the trees. They were thought it was going to be out on the coast somewhere because it's a seabird. Yet this bird relies on these trees, this forest, and it flies out to this cold ocean to feed. It's a real direct connection between, you know, the cold ocean, the fog, the forest, all of it kind of comes together in this one creature. But this going up slope and going from the coast to the mountains creates these habitats. So I wanted to show you the diversity we have here on the coast by thinking of Half Moon Bay. And then, like, what if you started watching birds on the beach and went up through Wave Crest here and then up through Burley Murray and then further up into the Purissima Redwoods, sort of the kinds of things you see and what you could be contemplating and thinking about as you're watching those birds, and realizing the diversity we have just within a narrow range, just going up the hill. I think we first would start with the town itself, you know, so if you're, you know, El Granada or Half Moon Bay or, you know, the Ocean Colony, you're in this urban, suburban kind of situation. And not only because we are surrounded by nature, but the fact that we tend to have trees even within our urban sort of landscape. We have a lot of birds here. So in the backyard, when I'm saying to you, hey, you should start by looking things in the backyard, there's a lot to see. There's also a lot to learn if you're new at this. So these are house finches, and house finches, you might first look at the male. So if you want to learn the easier, sort of more colorful ones first, a male goldfinch, American goldfinch versus the female, it's easier. And you will look at marks like, okay, this one's got a red eyebrow, red throat, it's got stripy bits on the back, on the flanks, and it's sort of grayish brown. And I'll tell you that you first always concentrate on the color, but if you're even a seasoned birder, look at shapes, the way that how long tails are, what the beaks are, what the head shapes are, what the impressions that they might give you, whether a bird looks sort of, you know, big bodied or bulky, small headed. All those things actually really help because it makes you a better observer. But also when you see something like a female or a youngster, the fact that the red is not there doesn't trip you up as much because your shape, you're going, well, that actually looks kind of like a house finch in shape and size. And think about it, you do this kind of thing when you look at look at pets. You can identify the different breeds of dogs. Maybe some of you are even looking at the dog show the other day and seeing all those breeds of dogs. They all have shapes, sizes, structures, you know, that are different from each other, and the colors don't matter as much. Black lab, yellow lab, still labs. So if you start looking at shapes, that's a really great way to be looking at birds, and then, you know, transfer that over to these identifications. So here's the females, she's all stripy. And then you might sort of start, okay, you learn the house finch, it's coming to the feeder if you have a feeder all the time. And then you might see these other things that you're like, well, that looks like a house finch, but it's actually more red. There's more reddish bits on the back, and on even the flanks look kind of reddish tone rather than these brown tones. And then you realize, okay, this guy looks like he's got a bigger bill, bigger head, shorter tail, bulkier on the body. It's actually a purple finch. So you can have these two similar related species coming to the same feeder. And it's by watching details and who's who, and realizing that maybe the house finch is really common. You see them every day. The purple finch you don't see every day. And the difference is, and just looking over and over and over again, repetition, before you know it, you're not even looking at the features. You will know exactly what it is by just immediately seeing it and go, oh, that's a purple finch. And you don't even know why, because you've learned that species. And that point, you're not actually identifying the bird, you're recognizing it. And even little things like this little pale patch in front of the eye gives it a different look that the house finch doesn't have. And once you kind of put all that together, before you know it, you're expert birder, and seeing all sorts of details without even paying attention to them. You just automatically see all this stuff. In the urban situation, we also have we have specifically a lot of native birds, but we have also birds that have been brought here from other continents, and this happens all over the world. What we call introduced birds. They're in this case, it's the European collared dove and the European starling that were brought from Europe and Asia, and they're common and they're sort of part of the avifauna. And you may sort of say, well, they're not really our birds and so forth, but they're here. And even though they weren't here naturally, it's always worth looking at them, seeing what they're doing, and in fact, paying attention to these birds. We may even learn if they're causing any damage, or maybe they're more neutral. Who knows? But you learn from everything that's out there, and just keep in mind, though, that some of these birds are actually from elsewhere, and new species sometimes show up as climate changes or their ranges change and so forth. So it's always a dynamic process, this watching birds, even in the backyard. And these are sort of the native, species that might be similar to that collared dove and that starling. This is a mourning dove, and this is a brewer's blackbird. And those, boy, it's like they're kind of similar, those two things, but these are actually from here, always have been here. And you'll start seeing, well, actually the starling and the blackbird don't quite take the same habitats. And you start learning more about context, ecology, behavior by just looking and then reading. That always helps, to find more details. You can sort of learn about these birds. It makes them more interesting, and the more interesting they are, the more you want to see other ones and this one and pay attention to what's going on. And in the end, you could be just in your backyard watching birds and have no end of questions that will come up. You may set up flowers that are, either native plants or plants that don't need irrigation, like a lot of salvias and so forth, are great for hummingbirds, or a hummingbird feeder, of course. And during the season, sort of this, especially late winter, early spring, you can have both Anna's hummingbirds with a bright kind of raspberry colored head, and the Allen's hummingbird, which is more rusty with just sort of the shiny bit, the gorget on the throat rather than on the cap. So you have two very different looking. The Anna's is bigger, and then the Allen's is smaller. The Anna's is here all year round. The Allen's is a migrant, and the Allen's comes in late winter into the early spring, and then they leave by midsummer. When things get too dry for Allen's, they actually shoot down to Mexico and live in places that are wet at that time of year and have a lot of flowers up in the mountains. So Allen's is really mobile. Anna's hangs out all year round here into the middle of winter. And the females, of course, tougher, but you see this kind of greenish and gray bird, versus the Allen's has these rusty bits on the side and on the tail, and they're smaller. So you can always identify at least these two species. There's another one, the Rufus, which looks really like Allen's, and I don't want to get into that, but you can, for the most part, assume that the rusty one is Allen's around here much of the time. And if you're lucky enough to have hummingbirds nesting in your backyard, one of the coolest things about hummingbird nests is that they're stitched together with spiders' webs, and they also put like lichen on top to sort of make it blend in with the tree. But the spider's web part is so cool as an engineering feat, because hummingbird eggs are really tiny, and the young actually grow pretty quickly. And sometimes there's 2-3 birds in there, and they grow really big. And the hummingbirds don't want to have a huge nest, because the females are actually pretty small. So they want to have a small nest to incubate in and kind of cover those eggs. But as these young are growing, the nest needs to grow, and the nest actually stretches as the birds grow because of the spider's web being a very strong but also stretchy kind of material. So it's like a perfect solution And just watch that. If you ever have them in your backyard breeding, this little tiny nest will actually grow to become a big nest over time. And then there are some interesting ways once you have birders and you know birders and you're meeting them, you can annoy birders by certain sort of keywords. Like if you say I saw a seagull, the birders go, oh, they're not seagulls, they're Western gulls, or they're this or that. The other one is to say you saw a blue jay in your backyard if you live in California, because the blue jay is a real thing and it's found out east and up north. I always tell people like Toronto, the blue jays are in the east. So blue jays are in the east. What we have here are scrub jays, California scrub jays. So if you have a blue jay in the backyard, that it's actually the California scrub jay, and it's a real special species. It's only found in California, Oregon, and a little bit of Mexico. And yeah, the other thing, oh, people get annoyed. The birders don't like when you put the red dye in the hummingbird feeders. Don't say seagull, blue jays. Oh, there's, all these things that happen. But let's just say that you don't have blue jays in your backyard. You have scrub jays or maybe Steller's jays if they have the crest. As we continue on this diversity, we have then, we've kind of talked about town. Now we're going to talk about this coastal plain and the beach itself. So we think of wave crest and this flat area that used to be the sort of the old seashore before it got elevated a little bit, and we have grasslands there. We also have the beach itself, and if you go to places where there are creek mouths, those are some of the most diverse spots along the beach. And on the beach, you can see a lot of shorebirds, and depends on the season. But if you see those little white birds that go in and out of the waves, those are called sanderlings. Now, sanderlings, you see them on the beach all the time, probably, and you've probably never paid much attention to them. They're a kind of sandpiper. They fly all the way to the northernmost sections of the Arctic to nest. And for a short period of time, they go reddish like this. Actually, if you're not paying attention to a really specific time of year in that sort of late spring, and then when they come back in around July, you never get to see them as red. They look like the white and gray ones that you see most of the rest of the year. But they go so far north that most of them, sanderlings, breed north of Point Barrow. Point Barrow is the northernmost bit in the US. So they're actually in the Canadian Arctic, Greenland, other places. And they come all the way down, not only to here, all the way down to the Southern Hemisphere. One of the most amazing migrations, yet we sort of think of them as sort of always being on the beach. They're highly mobile, these birds. We have our resident breeding snowy plovers. They don't breed every year around here. They do in some other parts of the county, but they're out on the beach as well. Now, plovers have shorter bills than sandpipers, and they're visual in their feeding rather than feeling for their food with their beaks. The shorebirds in general, the sandpipers, are a really great way to show people, kids, anybody, the whole idea of diversity within a group, different colors, different shapes, and different beak sizes and beak shapes. So this is a whimbrel here, willet, black-bellied plover. And we can look at that whimbrel and you see that its bill is like a tweezer in order to pick things up off the beach, even probe with it a little bit. And its relatives, like the long-billed curlew, marble godwit, different kind of bill sizes and bill shapes for their own way of looking for food. And then you think, well, why so much beak diversity? And in fact, you even think about Darwin's finches in the Galapagos, and there's the big ones with big bills and little ones. If you've read about that story, it's because birds don't have hands. They don't have arms. They're not like raccoons. They can't move things around with their limbs, their wings. So they have to fly with the wings. The only way of finding food are with their bill, their beak, or their feet, or both. So they can scratch around, and they have to have really specific beak types to be able to get to food. So beaks are really important in actually separating different kinds of birds. So do look at that when you're out there. Like a Western gull has a really thick, very multi-purpose bill. Like it can eat fish with that, or it can eat French fries with that, right? So one of the reasons why Western gulls and a lot of gulls have been rather successful, especially around people. And our Western gull, I say, is a special gull because it is only found on the coast. They're not found inland like the California gull. And they have a really restricted range. Most of them breed largely in California, a little bit into Oregon and Washington. But they're actually, as far as the gull goes, pretty range restricted. They're not, some gulls are found like all over the Northern Hemisphere. Not this one. It's kind of a special one. And if you're out there at the beach, you might see the Caspian terns looking for smelt or anchovy. And right now they're finding a lot of anchovy, and you'll see these, they look like a gull, but have a red beak, actually a little bit more pointy in their wings. And that you'll see these Caspian terns flying with a little fish about this big, anchovy, and they fly inland. And you think, well, why are those birds going inland? These Caspian terns are breeding on the bay side, in San Francisco Bay, and they come out here to fish. They grab one fish and then commute all the way back to give that fish to the young at the nest and then come back to the coast. So if you think you've got a bad commute, they're doing it multiple times a day. And what's really interesting to me is they find the easiest place to get across the mountains, which is right along Highway 92. So you will see terns and gulls flying right over you as you're commuting on Highway 92. Yet they're going to feed on the coast and then come back with that food to the bay. We have multiple summer visitors. The brown pelicans right now are really common. There's masses of them in the harbor. They're being followed around by Heermann's gulls. In the last few days, sooty shearwaters have set up in Half Moon Bay in the evenings. I don't know if some of you have seen them. They look like kind of a big oil slick of birds. And see if this, you can see this video. This was a day, that was a day when there were several 100,000 sooty shearwaters in the bay, Half Moon Bay. We think maybe 2 days ago there were about 100,000 in here, and there could have been even more the day before. And they don't come in every day, but if you see that big slick of birds, they're going after anchovies and really lots of food that's gathered up right along in Half Moon Bay right now. And they are amazing migrants. So they're here right now, but during their entire route in their year, they may do a figure 8 around the ocean like this. And they may be breeders from New Zealand or breeders from Chile. We don't know exactly, they're probably mixed in those groups. And this thing of them gathering up on the coast in masses doesn't happen every year. Sometimes they're 10 miles offshore, but this year they're actually coming in really close to land. And they're looking for forage fish. It could be squid, it could be anchovy, it could be various other sardines in some years. And I'll mention that this little picture here on the right, you see there's like the red is when a sonar device is detecting a lot of stuff in the water. And this stuff is either down deep or up on the surface. This is the surface up there. This is down deep down here. And they go up to the surface at night, all of these critters that are in the water, and then they could come down in the day. So squid, plankton, all sorts of things that are in the water actually come up to the surface at night. And that is probably when most of these shearwaters are feeding. So when they're coming in the evening and the afternoon en masse, and we have 100,000 around here, or 40 or 30,000, whatever it might be, it's probably to hang in for the nighttime feeding when a lot of the stuff's going to come closer to the surface. And of course, whales. And there have been multiple humpback whales right around in Half Moon Bay in the last week or so. So watch for them too. They're feeding on the same things. If you ever out there and you sort of think you see a shark, sometimes it is a shark, but a lot of times if you see sort of a shark-like fin, it's the bottlenose dolphin, and they tend to be right close to shore, and they have kind of real, elongated kind of classic shark-like fin, but they, tend to sort of come up in the water. Those are bottlenose dolphins. Also quite common here is the harbor porpoise. They have a low fin, kind of more of a backward pointing triangle. So if you ever want to separate the two small cetaceans we have right along the coast, and you can see them right from the beach, that's how you do it. In fact, there's more harbor porpoises than dolphins, but dolphins are easier to see than the porpoises. So keep that all in mind. And every so often, you do actually see a shark. Continuing with our grasslands wave crest, it is a well-known California-wide well-known spot for raptors. This is a red-tailed hawk, and one of the common species here that breeds. There are also harriers and white-tailed kites. The white-tailed kites also breed here. The harriers breed in south part of our county, not necessarily right around here, but they're already showing up. Wavecrest is a great place for raptors because many times there are great populations of voles. California voles are like a little mouse, and they're teeming right now. They're picking up numbers, and the raptors are starting to show up again, and they kind of build up towards the late fall and early winter. That's when we get the most number of raptors. We've done raptor talks in the past, so I won't talk more about raptors, but be aware this might be a good year for them again because the voles are out, in numbers. We have our also little birds in that grassland. The Savannah sparrow is a stripy sparrow, a little yellow in front of the eye. And I just wanted to point out that Savannah sparrows are all over North America, from the Arctic to parts of Canada, prairies, they're all over. But in the coast, we have a very specific, darker type of Savannah sparrow that's afforded a certain level of protection. We call it a California species of special concern because its range has been dwindling and it's becoming less common, and it's a subpopulation of the Savannah sparrow. Yet in Half Moon Bay, we have lots of them. It's one of the best places for them on the Central Coast is right around Wavecrest and the area right in, all the way to Kelly for Savannah sparrows. And continuing, so if we go further up the mountains, we get into place like Burley Murray Ranch State Park, which is chaparral and riparian forest. That's forest that's right next to the creek, alders, willows, so forth. And it's a superb area, not only for birds, but you can see mammals there, foxes, bobcats, deer, rabbits. It's great for butterflies. It's actually a top butterfly spot for the butterfly people. And if you're into flowers, great for flowers. And of course, you can do all of these things too. You can't, you can go out there and decide you're going to watch birds, but also see what else is out around there. And great place to hear the California quail. If you've ever not heard them, this is what they sound like. It's the state bird. It's a really cool looking bird. And when you're in that chaparral, you could also see birds like the wren-tit or the orange-crowned warbler. And I just want to make a difference here between the fact that these two birds are found together at certain times of the year, but the warbler is a migrant. It's here during the breeding season quite commonly, and then leaves in winter, while the wren-tit is here all year round. And the wren-tit you will hear in the shrubbery. This is what they sound like. So if you heard that, here, do it again. There, have this bouncing ball because it's like tick, 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 and then sometimes another bird goes just tick, 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 tick. Let's see, I think play the full thing. The second one the one going tick, tick, tick is the female. and the one that does the trill is the male, and they sing in a duet. They actually mix their songs together and are a way to maintain this pair bond. It's like they're talking to each other. And when the male goes, the female replies, and they stay all year together as a pair and probably through multiple years. So they might, some of them be lifetime monogamous birds in a sense, and they're residents. And that kind of thing happens with resident birds. It's not so much with migratory birds that have to come in at a certain time of year and have a short time to sort of find a mate, breed, and then migrate south, something like a barn swallow. And I wanted to point out another benefit of if you're paying attention to nature and you're a birder, is that every day means something. So a winter day, a early spring day, a late spring day, that the calendar starts actually making more, it's more relevant in terms of like, there's all of these natural patterns that have timing that happen to them. And then you have to pay attention to that. You suddenly are like, oh, April's coming, this is going to happen, or a certain weather type might be happening, and that's important. So it gets you so much connection in general to other things that are happening in the natural world that I think it's something we don't think about. A lot of people, they know Monday to Friday and weekend. That's all they know in their life. But you, as a nature person, start paying attention to, oh, December, end of December is actually important for this or that, whatever. Here's another migrant warbler, Wilson's warbler. It's very common out there in Burley Murray. And with these migratory birds like Wilson's, orange crowns, Townsend's, we always think of them as our birds, but we actually have to think about the fact that we're sharing them with other people, other environments in the world. So many of our migratory birds go down to southern Mexico, central Mexico, Guatemala. So it's cool to me, for me to think that a Townsend's warbler that I could be enjoying here, going through as a migrant, might end up in somewhere in Guatemala, and maybe these Guatemalan women have it in their backyard for a period of time, and then it comes through as a migrant going north, and then might breed in British Columbia or Alaska, where somebody else might get to see that. And we're so connected by these birds when we start thinking about it. Here's another migrant down in the Burley Murray area, but I want to show you, have you listened to this? Because it's a really kind of amazing fluty song, the Swainson's thrush. And thinking about paying attention to the time of year, they arrive kind of late in spring. They sing into June, into July, and then that ends. There's only a period, a few weeks, that you will hear that song before they're done. They finish breeding, and then later they migrate south. So there's a sadness to that, right? It happens, and you could miss it, but there's also an excitement of like, oh, I'm going to catch it next year and hear this and go see this kind of thing. So it depends on how you look at it. And it's a great place, Burley Murray, for all sorts of other birds that come in that are migrants, like this black-headed grosbeak, this olive-sided flycatcher. Olive-sided flycatcher is also a California species of special concern. It's not quite endangered, it's not that, but it's sort of in the, like, let's watch this one. And they've been declining quite a bit over the years. They used to be throughout Half Moon Bay. You could hear them from parts of town. Now you don't hear them in town anymore. They're now in the more wild areas further away from town. Why that's happened, I don't know, but they're getting less common. And as our climate is changing, I mentioned the fog is not as common as it used to be. Places are getting warmer. The habitats haven't necessarily shifted, although we're losing some trees. You can see them dying over the years. We're having some birds show up in the breeding season that didn't used to be around. House wren, Bell's sparrow, black-chinned sparrow, all these have actually shown up during the breeding season in places around Half Moon Bay. Some might actually be breeding, others might be just trying, but they weren't here before, and they're much more, warmer, drier species, and they're kind of poking their heads in as our climate is changing. So the canary in a coal mine might be a house wren, not a canary. That's telling us that things are changing, and it's happening right here on the coast. Um, your patch. When you go to bird these places and you're seeing scrub jays, Steller's jays, you might decide there's a specific place that you like that is particularly good or fun. And I would say make it your patch. Visit it again and again and again, different times of the year, and you see things change. You see migration. You see what the breeding season looks like, what the youngsters look like. Restricting yourself to just a few places that you visit, especially as you're learning birds, is really good because it kind of narrows the variability in some ways, and it also makes you focus on change within one area. And thinking about change and adapting to the environment, I want to say something about bandtail pigeons. This is a native wild pigeon, really big one. It actually does have a band on the tail when you get to see it. They've started eating those little eucalyptus acorns, which I thought nobody ate those things because they're like a big menthol, oily, weird thing. They eat them. And I wonder if they do well with them. They're actually a good food for them or not. Nobody knows, but they've somehow adapted. They've changed their behavior to eating eucalyptus, those little things. So sort of like, is that good, bad? Are they getting benefits? I don't know, but you can see things happen, how birds adapt. And kind of finally, let's end up on, we're going up now, up the slope, and we're up in the Redwoods, and where the sort of the cloud actually hits and drips and falls down in the middle of the night when we have that marine layer. And this is actually the hardest habitat to watch birds in because everything is way up the top. Every so often you might see these little brown creepers. They look like a little piece of bark going up the tree, and that's the good place to find them, is in redwoods. In the breeding season, in some parts you might see the hermit warbler, and in the winter the Townsend's warbler shows up, but they are treetop birds, so really hard to see. Sometimes you will hear them more than see them, especially the breeding hermit warblers, but they're up there. And that shade component, there are some species that are found throughout the area, like the chestnut-backed chickadee, but the chestnut-backed chickadee actually likes shade. When you have big shady trees, they're into it. So you'll see that chickadee flocks are actually quite common and in the redwoods. And there are other birds that love shade and high trees that are much harder to see and are not in backyards, like the golden crown kinglet. The kinglets are in there in those habitats, and they have a very high pitched song, and they're really cool when you get to see them up close. They do have a golden crown, but I say it's a little harder to bird those areas because the birds are a little higher up. But if you start getting to listen to them or look at the birds that are in the shrubbery next to the creek, you might see the Pacific wren, which is a relative of our backyard Buick's wren. And listen to this because it's got a cool song. If you ever hear this bird and you think, oh my gosh, that crazy song, long song, and it goes on and it's complicated and must be this huge bird. It's just this little tiny bird, but it probably has sort of the biggest song for its size of any creature around here. And it's just a little brown thing with a stick up tail. And it's really a species that you see in that shady forest, but they're also in Quarry Park. They're in Burley Murray as well. So you get further up into the creek. The song sparrows, they can be in open areas, in closed areas. One thing I've noticed is in winter, in the redwoods, you have these dark song sparrows, unlike the pale ones we see on the coast, like actually right at the coast. And I think these dark ones are coming in from the Pacific Northwest, and they're taking shadier habitats like the edge of redwoods because that's more like what they see in the Pacific Northwest. So the more you pay attention, the more questions that come up. Remember, I said it's sort of, you would think that song sparrow being a common species throughout North America, you would just sort of know and everything would be known about them, but actually maybe not. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And it's a great place to see the woodpeckers, hairy and downy woodpecker. And I'll end with a little bit on bird identification and something that it there's ways to, you don't need to know the name of anything to enjoy it. You can just watch a colorful bird, but the moment you want to know the name, um, you can then add context to that. So you can say, okay, so if that's an American goldfinch, it does this, or it nests here, or it eats this, or it does that. Without knowing it's an American goldfinch, you can't actually get that context that makes things more interesting. So putting a name to something, I think, is important. And for us, crows and ravens, is that a crow? Is that a raven? The crow is the smaller build, raven's the bigger build thing. Raven has these sort of big, shaggy beard. The raven can look almost like a monster, and it's got these long wings. The crow is a little bit more like a classic bird, a little smaller, not so extreme. Ravens are hawk-like when they fly, long wings and all this kind of stuff. And the the whole idea of identification can be daunting, and it can be also really gratifying. But there's an element that I want you to think about, is that there's a moment when you're trying to figure out that raven. You have your binoculars and you're looking at these features and you're paying attention, and it's you and the raven. You're just connecting, you're thinking, you're going through really what is almost like a meditation and an exploration, and it's teaching you something by the way it looks or behaves or or calls. And that in itself is something that can be really relaxing, to actually identify birds. And then when you say, you know what, I'm clear, this is a raven, you you get such a little joy that you've achieved something, and something. And you might look around and there's all these other people walking around with their dogs and so forth. They might not know that that's a raven, and it makes you feel a little special, and that you and the raven have that connection. And then you move on to other birds and so on. And I want to just point that out, that there's something very special about watching birds, that where if you let that happen, it's really kind of cool. And just always remember to keep it fun, because it can get daunting sometimes. It can get complicated, and you know, maybe you don't know how to tell this apart from that. Don't worry. You can always sort of step back, look at something you already know that you maybe is colorful and out there like a spotted towhee, and bring yourself back down to the, like, I just need to enjoy this. I don't need to be an expert. I don't need to know everything. You just take it to the level where you want to. And I say that there's a whole other world. I could keep on going, eastwards all the way to the next coast, and each place has its different climate. Each place has its different birds. And these two are oak species, oak titmouse and white-breasted nuthatch. We don't see them on the coast side, yet you can drive to the other side of the hill and they're over there. So it's all, um, how much you want to pay attention to. And I just want to tell you that what I've told you is just a little tiny bit of what is out there. So hopefully, if you haven't already done so, bring birds into your life and make it fun, interesting, and have fun with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro, from so many of us. Yeah, gosh, always learn a lot. And before we get into questions, before we get into Q&A, I just wanted to share with everybody here, because we're gonna give ourselves a little bit of time. But I know some of you have to jet before you listen to all the questions, to check out Alvaro's website, because I mean we just got Alvaro back from Ecuador. I know he has a sold out tour tomorrow, but all through next week and all in through next weekend and all in through July, August, September. He'll be running tours out in the Farallon Islands, out, offshore Half Moon Bay, Morro Bay, Monterey Bay. So get on that website and see, get out there and start this birding. When he's talking about building these connections, there's no better way than just to get out into the ocean, these pelagic tours. And also international tours. I mean, if any of you are interested in some international birding to just jumpstart your ornithological start, or if you've been doing it for a long time, I know in you're going to be heading to South Africa and
Yeah.
beginning of August.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's birds and wine. So like I said, you can add a little something sometimes to make it even more interesting.
Yeah, and then Chile in October, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and looks like you've got in November. Wow, it's pretty stacked. You've got Bolivia and Antarctica.
Yeah, Bolivia is a being led by Peter Burke, who's one of my good friends, colleagues from, yeah. So I don't go on all the trips, but it's I'm just glad to be out there doing it again, because we were,
Long time.
we were locked down for a while. So.
That's how we snagged you, actually, is that you happen to have like a resting period of time. I know you've been presenting for Coastside Land Trust for a long time, but to kind of get you to be a regular for a little
Yeah,
while, getting a lot.
yeah, a couple of things, like, and also in terms of learning about birds, I've started this like membership site called Birding Your Best Life, where I'm putting a lot of talks and structured classes if people wanted to sort of learn more about raptors, or doing a sparrow one soon and all that. But I just wanted to say thank you for so many things that the Land Trust has done. First of all, I enjoy the lands that are being protected, but the other thing is, like, my first Zoom ever in my life was with you guys, and that opened up a whole series of possibilities, including this membership thing that I'm doing now. With it just opened up my mind to how you can reach people, that it doesn't have to be live in person every time. So thank you, Land Trust, but thank you in particular for preserving the land that we visit and enjoy. And of course, everybody who's listening, donate.
Thank you. Yes, and when you say thank you, that's to the Land Trust. That's thank you to so many of you, and to the people who are looking at, who are watching and showing up and donating a little bit or a lot. Yeah. Yeah, and just before we get into Q&A, I also, coming up next year, like Japan, Cuba, Thailand, Bhutan. I mean, like, yeah, get on the website and look.
Yeah,
Oh my.
I'm getting tired just listening to that.
I know, I know. Hence the losing your voice. All right,
Yeah.
we got a couple of questions. Ooh, some of these are great. The big one I want to address before, a number of questions. If you've asked questions about, someone asked about binoculars, someone asked about lenses and things like that. If you've asked a question like that, I think we'll move that towards the follow-up email, because I think those are easy ones to get Alvaro to put a little information. So a lot of the stuff, like Birding Your Best Life, we will put those links on an email that we'll be sending out tomorrow. So look for that when it comes out tomorrow. But there's a couple of a large number of questions, actually, but one I want to just get to, where that we'll send a link to tomorrow about places to get your book, because I think that gets tricky. There's so many places. I know people are trying to track it down, and people are really hopeful to get it through local sources. So
Yeah, it'd be, I should try to look and see if they have it at the local bookstores, and maybe give them a heads up to where they can find it. But
we'll send them
to have it.
Email them. We'll spend a little time and look and see where
Yeah.
the best is, because it kind of comes and gets, people enjoy it and then buy it out, and then we got to get them again. So, okay. So one person asked a question, Colleen was asking, and this is a question I think a lot of people wonder about, because they see a lot of pelicans at one point in the year, and then they see just a smaller number of pelicans, whether the brown pelicans migrate, and if so, when and where do they go?
Yeah, they're migrants, and they breed mostly in Southern California and Baja California, Mexico. They move north. It's odd if you think about it. Like, they breed and they move north. Most birds in the northern hemisphere breed and move south, right? But they move north because at that time of year, the sort of summer and fall here is so productive in the ocean. We have more food, now into October than we do, in other times of the year. So they move north to us, and right now they're just booming. I mean, in fact, it's earlier than usual that we have. Usually the boom period is August, September, and a lot of the marine birds and even whales are earlier this year, just because there's so much food. So they do migrate, and they come up for the food. And probably the reason we have so much food this year is many of you who live on the coast probably were complaining earlier about how windy it was. Such a windy, cold spring. That wind is what has created a lot of the upwelling that's brought the food to us. So it's, yeah, I mean, I was complaining about the wind, even though I know that it's has some benefits, but it's like, it's so windy.
Um, Great. Let's see. Best place to find kestrels.
Um, Kestrels here are mostly winter. So right on the coast, and Wavecrest is a great place to see kestrels in the winter, or even between Kelly and Poplar and that strip of coastal sort of prairie. But mostly in winter. In summer, you've got to go to drier places. And like I said, some birds from drier spots are coming into the coastside. There have been some kestrels locally in summer in the last few years, and I wonder if they might be trying to breed up in the area of the antennas above the harbor. So, because I've seen them in the middle of summer, but mostly a winter species for us.
Thanks. How about what kinds of we have one person has two questions for you. They said, what kinds of chickadees are in our area, and how old were you when you first started birding, and what got you into it?
Yeah, the chestnut-back chickadees are the ones that we have here, and that is really the only one, other than the relative is the oak titmouse on the other side of the hill that we have. But I started birding when I was 11 years old in Canada. So I grew up in Toronto. So that's it's been, yeah. So that's 145 years ago, I think. that's how that's how old I feel.
Yeah.
I have a kid just started, went to college this year. So, that just really makes you feel like, boy, I'm an old person now.
Oh, that's when we start to feel old, huh?
Yeah.
Couple of questions about the hummingbirds. So, let's see, lifespan of the hummingbirds.
Oh, lifespans are really difficult to actually know, because you have to put a band, a ring on a bird and let it go out in nature and then have it come back again. But there have been a lot of hummingbird banding projects. And I would say that probably the average is something like 5 years or something. But I bet their oldest birds are probably in the 8-year range, is my kind of just off the top of my head guess.
Okay. For a little tiny one.
Yeah.
What about let's see. Do we know all the species of hummingbird that use spider webs for their nest? Do any other species do this as well?
Yeah, other birds will collect spider webs to, especially around here, the bush tits that make that long hanging, looks like a sock almost with that entrance. And they have a lot of tensile strength, yet they're flexible and they can move in the wind and so forth. They use spiders' webs as well as grasses to weave things. And a lot of small birds will use a bit of spider's web, but not so much. Like the hummingbirds use so much spider webs that you will see them around your house if you're paying attention when they're building at the corners of the windows, and they're coming in to get spider webs to grab them for their nests. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of help. That's nice. What about this person's asking about the black crowned sparrow? I mean, not the black crowned night herons, where they
Night
go
herons.
because they're the ones who roost in the harbor, right? But then,
Yeah, and they're breeding in there, and they um they they actually are a heron. They fish, like regular herons, but they do it at night. So it's really creepy sometimes if you're going out on a early boat trip, and it's still dark and you're sort of getting the boat ready, and these herons are walking around the wharf, and they have this hunchback look. They look like they're up to trouble, so they look like sort of like these. It's an interesting bird, but why they become nocturnal when almost all the other herons are diurnal is interesting. And it may be that they have a certain, herons are clever. The green heron will actually sometimes put food out for fish. Like they'll actually use like bread or even things that look like bread and put it in the water so that the fish come to eat that, and then they grab the fish. So they actually use bait. So herons are interesting, and I wonder if they have a nocturnal way to sort of, get the fish to come close or something. Yeah, I don't know enough about them, but I think they're interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting too when you were bringing up that daily migration between the twilight and the sunlight zone and the ocean, and that influence on birds as well.
Yeah, and this is why I like when there's squid around and there's fishing going on, the squid fisheries, they do it all at night, and we'll see the big lights offshore. It's because the squid are attracted to light, but also they're actually closer to the surface at night. So that's why it all has to happen at night.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Are the peregrine falcons that nest at Devil's Slide permanent residents, and do their chicks stay in the area, or do they disperse?
Yeah, they're permanent residents, but the chicks they need to find their own place, so and most likely they'll wander around for about a year looking for a spot, and they could end up relatively close, or they could end up moderately far from where they grew up. But there is a dispersal period of time, but yet those adults are likely going to be there the entire year in the general area. So that's not all peregrines are residents. Some of them are highly migratory, like the ones in the Arctic where they have to leave. But ours have food year round, so they can hang out.
Oh, lots of, yeah. Someone was asking about the bald eagle that they saw flying over 92. And I know other people are interested in the ones that, the nesting pair down in Pescadero. Are there any pairs still nesting around Crystal Springs Reservoir or nearby?
Yeah, I think there is a pair in Crystal Springs, but it's not accessible. And that's the one you see on Highway 92. And then, 20 years ago, bald eagles were quite rare here in our part of the Bay Area, and they've just been slowly getting more common. And I would say the last 5 to 10 years, we really have had a real uptick. Now, I mean, I think it's just, they're colonizing old territory that they'd lost during the DDT era, and we're sort of the last part of North America that hasn't been really recolonized here by bald eagles. They're now very common in the East Coast and Great Lakes and so forth. So.
Someone was asking, they were talking, Jane wrote, as coastal landscapes lose more trees due to wildfire fuel reduction, in the hope of some specialist to return to the local landscape to the 1800s scrub environment. Is anyone monitoring how much tree canopy is being lost? Maybe you know this, in California coastal environments, and are bird specialists involved in monitoring these environmental changes to the fog bank and habitat changes for bird sustainability? So yeah, our bird specialists, do you know how some folks are in the ornithological community are involved in this monitoring?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question, because we know in any kind of change, like even climate change, it's not like everything goes extinct. There's, there's winners and losers in every kind of environmental change. Some species will do well in certain new regimes, other species will do poorly or die out. So, in the case of wildfires, there will be more woodpeckers, foxes, swifts, maybe pileated woodpeckers, which is actually kind of a neat species, may expand quite a bit. There will be, the way that the canopy's opened up and the new habitats that come in as the undergrowth is growing create habitat for a bunch of birds. But we sort of are concerned about the ones that are really specialist on forests, like the marbled murrelet. We're worried about them. So there's often more tracking of those special species rather than an overall, like what is happening, because that is actually much harder to do. Like even woodpeckers, do we have baseline info on how many woodpeckers there are per acre of forest right now? We don't. And some of the best information we have are by birders going and saying, oh, I saw a woodpecker here at a certain spot, and put that on eBird, that international database. And over time, if people are diligent in actually writing down how many individual birds they see at any one spot, we might be able to like extract that from those databases. But given how much of California has burnt in the last 5 years, we don't have enough biologists to track that much land, so we'd have to do it satellite level, kind of really big picture, but we don't really know. I would say it's a good question to propose to people who have the power to fund some of these things, because we do want to know what is the outcome of some of these fires. And there will be good outcomes and bad outcomes, right? There's going to be some species that do well as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone was talking about vultures in Moss Beach. They've been seeing a lot of vultures also. Where are they nesting? And
yeah, turkey vultures are actually really hard to find their nests. They're really stealthy for a big bird. It's very hard to find their nests, but and they can even nest in old barns and things, like places you'd never expect. And our vulture numbers seem to go up if we have a lot of sun, because they don't like to flap. So if it's really foggy and there's just not, updrafts of air, the vultures stay on the sunny side of the mountain. And when it's sunnier, they come out here. But there are a lot, there can be food right on shore, and also food from roadkill and so forth. And there's plenty of food around for them, but the numbers seem to go up and down depending on how much sun we have. They're really mobile. So
I'm going to be seeing more of them. Robin asks, could the flycatcher be declining because of the decline in insects?
it could be, yeah. The overall decline of insects in general worldwide is troubling. And a lot of people think it might be that we're using so many pesticides sort of generally in our world that we've created an issue of insect decline. And all the insect specialists are saying that insects are declining all over the world. They don't quite know how or why exactly, but it could be. They're also migrants that are going, some of them are going all the way to the Amazon basin, or really far distant places that there may be other changes going on in their migration route. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong for a migratory bird, as opposed to a resident bird that has less variables. So, but yeah, that's a really good hypothesis, but I don't know if that's the case or not with this flycatcher.
Any thoughts about why the green herons are disappearing?
I'm not sure they're disappearing. We've never had many on the coast. They're more like in the bayside. So here they show up here and there, but they're actually still pretty common on the bayside, and in some places in North America, they're actually really abundant. So I'm not sure that we're really getting a smaller number. Could be a little locally, but overall, I think they're all right.
I know a lot of you typed questions into the chat, and I think we'll get to those afterwards. I'm going to try to just tag these last couple in the Q&A section, and then we'll hopefully answer some of the chat ones in a follow-up email. But let's see. Charlotte saw lots of gulls heading to the Half Moon Bay coast from San Carlos in the past few weeks. Are they migrating from somewhere to summer at the coast?
No. So California gulls they're almost strictly California gulls right now. And they used to breed in Mono Lake and out there. And that was sort of their big headquarters historically. And then they started moving in the 70s and 80s into San Francisco Bay, to the point where the colonies in the bay were bigger than the ones in Mono Lake. And a lot of that had to do with the number of landfills all around the bay. So once we had these big colonies established, some of them figured out that there was good feeding on the coast. So they come out in like groups, like actually bees, like almost like geese. They look like they're migrating, but they're going offshore and to the beach. They're feeding here and then bringing back the food to the nest, or actually just feeding themselves here and then coming back to, it's just because it's good feeding. So they're doing day trips. They're not migrating. And now that a lot of the landfills have closed, it'd be interesting to see if the gull population changes, or if they've figured out how to make do without, bits of chicken that they would have found at the landfill.
Oh, this someone saw an osprey perched on their power line at the edge of Montero Beach the other day. Is this? They're asking if it's unusual to see that.
Well, it, like the bald eagles, it would have been unusual some years ago. Like they're becoming more common, the osprey, and I gather there is a nest somewhere in Moss Beach or Montara that might be new, but that's the rumor I've heard. There's a nest out there. And by the way, if you ever see any bird nesting, especially a big raptor, try not to bother it, not get close. And if you're trying to photograph it, don't approach the nest to get a better picture. Just as a thing, you might be thinking you're not, they're okay, but probably best to err on the side of caution, especially with big birds where there's not many of them around the coast. And even the, backyard birds, just be, cognizant of letting them be. And, you can observe a hummingbird nest close, that's in the backyard, but there's an appropriate sort of like, distance. And they actually, in the backyard, birds get to sort of know you a little bit. But so that's, they're probably not as concerned, but just a little warning about just being respectful. But yeah, I think there might be an osprey nest out that and I actually don't know where it is. So, but that's what I've heard.
Okay. Awesome. All right, we should probably let you go. There are a couple more left here, but we will make sure we send those your way. Thank you so much, Alvaro, for all of this, for your incredible presentation, and thank you all for being here. A lot of you have stuck around through the Q&A section as well. So yeah, we have a follow-up email coming out tomorrow. So hopefully those remaining questions that you have will be answered. And just remember this, check Alvaro out. Please make sure that you're donating to the cause to help us keep doing this. This is why we can do that, why we do this, how we can do this. And keep up to date. We've got a work day coming up next month out on the coast here. So another Wavecrest work day. It's a great way to meet people. Honestly, it's a great way to connect with the community. We'll put you to work, but at the level that you're willing to, get in there and get after it. But it's also just a place to get to know your ecosystem. So yeah, there's that. We've got Tony Corelli coming up, and just a neighbor of Alvaro's as well. But
Just over there.
Truly down the street. But yeah, that is a stacked street of knowledge there. But yeah, she's incredible, and she's going to be talking about the wetland plans. So if you haven't gotten to hear one of her talks before, it is definitely worth it. And then we got Gray Hayes coming to talk about re-indigenation of the coastal prairie, and I think that will be really worth our time too. So that's coming up soon. So thank you again, all of you, for being here, and we will see you all again. We've got the work day next month, so we will see you all, hopefully, or many of you, back in a couple of months. All right, thank you, Alvaro.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, everybody.